My name is Diana, and at 67 years old, I never expected to be disrespected in my own family. After building a successful business with my late husband, I thought I had earned some respect. But my daughter-in-law, Stephanie, had other ideas. At my birthday dinner, she called me just the babysitter in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that I was the sole trustee of her children's $1 million trust fund. Before I tell you how I turned their entitlement into regret overnight, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family disrespect. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where my parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. My father worked at the local factory, and my mother was a seamstress who took in extra work to help make ends meet. From an early age, I learned that nothing in life comes easy, and that lessons stayed with me throughout my life. I met my husband Thomas during my sophomore year of college. I was working 3 jobs to pay for my business degree, and he was the handsome engineering student who kept coming to the diner where I waitressed. We fell in love over late-night coffee and dreams of building something together. After graduation, with nothing but student loans and big ideas, we started a small engineering consultancy in our garage. Those early years were tough. We worked 18-hour days sometimes, going without proper meals, just to reinvest in the business. Thomas was brilliant with the technical aspects, and I handled the business operations. Slowly but surely, our little company grew. By our 10th anniversary, we had 30 employees. By our 20th, we had offices in 3 states and contracts with major corporations. We built our fortune brick by brick with no shortcuts and plenty of sacrifices along the way. Our only son, James, was born 5 years into our marriage. Despite our busy schedules, we made sure he never felt neglected. We wanted him to have the opportunities we didn't have, but we were also determined not to raise an entitled child. James went to good schools, participated in sports and music lessons, but also had chores and summer jobs. We paid for his college education in full, allowing him to graduate debt-free from a prestigious university with a business degree of his own. I remember the day James called to tell us about Stephanie. He sounded so happy, so in love. They had met during his final year of college, where she was studying art history. Thomas and I were thrilled that our son had found someone special. We flew out to meet her the following weekend, eager to welcome her into our family. My first impression of Stephanie was mixed. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfect blonde hair and an elegant way of carrying herself. She was charming and articulate when she spoke about art and culture. But there was something about the way her eyes lingered on James's watch, the way she casually mentioned his future inheritance, that gave me pause. Still, I pushed these thoughts aside. After all, everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt, and if James loved her, I was determined to love her too. The wedding was extravagant, mostly at Stephanie's insistence. Thomas and I paid for everything as tradition dictated, though the final bill was 3 times what we had budgeted. During the planning process, I noticed how Stephanie would often dismiss my suggestions, sometimes even rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. James seemed oblivious, or perhaps unwilling to see the subtle disrespect. After the honeymoon, I began to notice changes in James. He called less frequently, and when he did, Stephanie was always hovering nearby, often interrupting or speaking for him. When they visited, she would subtly criticize our home, suggesting upgrades or mentioning friends who lived in more upscale neighborhoods. James, once confident and outspoken, became quiet and deferential around her. 2 years into their marriage, they announced they were expecting their first child. Despite the tension that had been building, this news brought me immense joy. Thomas and I were going to be grandparents. Lucy was born on a beautiful spring morning, and the moment I held her in my arms, I fell completely in love. 2 years later, little William joined the family, and my heart expanded once again. It was around this time that Thomas and I began discussing the children's future. We had amassed considerable wealth and wanted to ensure our grandchildren would be provided for. After careful consideration, we established a trust fund for Lucy and William with a value of just over $2 million. The money would be available to them for education, starting a business, buying their first home, or whatever they might need as they grew into adulthood. Crucially, we made me the sole trustee with complete discretion over the disbursement of funds based on not just financial need, but character development and family values. Thomas passed away unexpectedly when William was just 1 year old. The loss was devastating, and in my grief, I found myself reaching out to James and his family even more. I offered to babysit regularly to help with household expenses, to be present in whatever way they needed. In retrospect, perhaps my generosity sent the wrong message. Stephanie's sense of entitlement grew exponentially after Thomas died. What started as occasional hints about financial assistance became outright expectations. She would casually mention private preschools that cost more than most people's annual salary, then look at me expectantly. When they decided to renovate their already beautiful home, the bill somehow found its way to my inbox. I paid it without complaint, telling myself I was doing it for my grandchildren. I continued to shower Lucy and William with love and attention. I bought educational toys, read to them for hours, took them to museums and parks. Stephanie often discarded the gifts I brought, claiming they didn't match the aesthetic of their home. Any advice I offered about childcare was dismissed as outdated or irrelevant. Still, I persisted, treasuring the moments when it was just me and my grandchildren, their little faces lighting up when I arrived. Despite everything, I never told James or Stephanie about the trust fund. Thomas and I had agreed it would be our secret until the children were older, to prevent any sense of entitlement from taking root. Little did I know how important that decision would prove to be. As Lucy and William grew older, I settled into a routine of babysitting them every Tuesday and Thursday, while James was at work and Stephanie attended her art appreciation classes or lunched with friends. These days quickly became the highlight of my week. Away from their mother's watchful eye, my grandchildren and I would bake cookies, plant flowers in my garden, and read stories for hours. Lucy, now 5, had her grandmother's love for numbers and would beam with pride when she finished a math puzzle. 3-year-old William had inherited his grandfather's curiosity about how things worked, constantly dismantling toys to peek inside. The joy these moments brought me made it easier to tolerate Stephanie's increasing disrespect. She would regularly arrive an hour or two later, then agreed to pick up the children, offering no apology or explanation. When I mentioned it once, she simply said, "I assumed you had nothing else to do anyway." The words stung, but I swallowed my pride. After all, wasn't that what grandmothers did, sacrifice for the sake of family harmony? The first major incident occurred when Lucy's 6th birthday approached. I had spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, and finally found a beautiful telescope, remembering how she had expressed interest in the stars during our nighttime stories. I wrapped it carefully and brought it to her party, my heart full of anticipation at seeing her reaction. "Oh," Stephanie said flatly when Lucy excitedly showed her the telescope. "That's interesting. We'll put it in the garage for now. There's no room for it in the house." Later that evening, as I was helping clean up, I overheard Stephanie on the phone with one of her friends. "Can you believe it? A telescope. So tacky and educational. I told her last time we prefer experiences or clothes, but she never listens. Just trying to play the good grandmother when all she's doing is cluttering up my house." I stood frozen, the trash bag heavy in my hands, tears threatening to spill. The worst part wasn't the ingratitude, but the realization that this wasn't the first time Stephanie had spoken about me this way. A few days later, I tried to discuss the situation with James over lunch. I carefully explained how hurt I felt by Stephanie's behavior, trying to keep my tone neutral and non-accusatory. "Mom, you're being too sensitive," he replied, barely looking up from his phone. "Stephanie just has specific tastes, that's all. And she's under a lot of pressure with the kids and her social commitments." "James, it's not about the gift. It's about basic respect and gratitude," I tried to explain. He sighed heavily, as if I were a child being difficult. "Look, can we just drop it? Things are good right now, and I don't want to rock the boat at home." That night I cried for hours, not just from the hurt, but from the painful realization that my son had changed. The confident, kind-hearted boy I raised had been replaced by someone who couldn't even stand up for his own mother. Thomas would have been heartbroken to see it. Despite this, I continued my babysitting duties, clinging to the relationship with my grandchildren. But Stephanie seemed emboldened by James's reaction, and her boundary testing escalated. The second incident came when Stephanie called one Monday evening. "Diana, we've decided to enroll Lucy in the Westfield Academy," she announced without preamble. Westfield was the most expensive private school in the area, known for its exclusivity rather than its academic excellence. "That's a big decision," I responded carefully. "Have you and James discussed the curriculum and teaching philosophy?" "Not really," she admitted. "But all our friends' children go there. Anyway, the enrollment fee is due Friday. It's $20,000. We thought you might want to cover it as a gift to Lucy." The presumption took my breath away. Not a request, not even a discussion, just an expectation that I would pay an exorbitant sum without question. "I think this is something we should all discuss together, including the financial aspects," I suggested. "Fine," Stephanie snapped. "I'll tell Lucy her grandmother doesn't value her education. James will be disappointed too." She hung up before I could respond. The manipulation was obvious but effective. After a sleepless night, I wrote the check telling myself it was for Lucy's benefit. James called to thank me, but there was something perfunctory in his voice, as if my contribution was expected rather than appreciated. The third and perhaps most painful boundary test came during the holidays. Traditionally, Christmas Eve had been spent at my home, a tradition dating back to when James was a child. That year, however, Stephanie announced they would be attending her friend's party instead. "But we always spend Christmas Eve together," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Traditions change," Stephanie replied coldly. "Besides, this party is important for James's networking. You can see the kids on Christmas Day for a few hours." When Christmas Day arrived, they were 3 hours late. The carefully prepared meal had grown cold, the children were cranky from hunger, and Stephanie spent most of the brief visit on her phone. As they were leaving, she casually mentioned they were thinking of buying a vacation home in Aspen and might need some financial assistance to make it happen. That night alone in the home that once held so much joy and family togetherness, I felt a growing resentment. I had given so much, not just financially, but emotionally, only to be treated as nothing more than a convenient ATM and occasional babysitter. Still, I told myself to persevere for Lucy and William's sake. They at least showed genuine love and appreciation for their grandmother. What I didn't realize then was that the worst was yet to come, and that my breaking point was just around the corner. My 67th birthday fell on a beautiful Saturday in April. Despite the tension of recent months, I was looking forward to the dinner James had arranged at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant downtown. It would be just the 5 of us: James, Stephanie, Lucy, William, and myself. Perhaps I thought optimistically this could be a turning point, a chance to rebuild some of the warmth and connection our family had lost. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, choosing a elegant navy blue dress that Thomas had always loved, arranging my silver hair in soft waves, even applying a touch of the perfume I reserved for special occasions. As I fastened the pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 40th anniversary, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened, I would focus on the positive and make this a pleasant evening for everyone. La Maison was even more beautiful than I remembered, with its warm lighting, fresh flowers on every table, and the soft notes of a piano drifting through the room. James and the children were already seated when I arrived. Lucy, now 7, looked adorable in her floral dress, and 5-year-old William was adorably uncomfortable in his little bow tie. James stood to greet me with a kiss on the cheek. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, handing me a small gift bag. "The kids picked this out specially for you." Inside was a handmade card with wobbly handwriting and a small silver photo frame containing a recent picture of Lucy and William. My heart swelled with love. "This is perfect," I said, hugging my grandchildren. "The very best present I could ask for." "Grandma, I made you a special dessert at home, too," Lucy whispered excitedly. "Daddy helped me. We can have it tomorrow when you come over." I was about to respond when Stephanie finally arrived 20 minutes late and without apology. She was impeccably dressed in a designer outfit I recognized from a magazine, her entrance turning heads throughout the restaurant. Traffic was a nightmare, she announced, though she lived less than 15 minutes away. She air-kissed my cheek and slid into her seat, immediately signaling for a waiter. "I need a glass of the Chateau Margaux right away." James gave me an apologetic look. We ordered some appetizers to share. I remembered you love the escargot here. The first half hour passed pleasantly enough. The children were well behaved, the food was delicious, and James made an effort to keep the conversation flowing, asking about my garden and the book club I had recently joined. Stephanie remained largely absorbed in her phone, occasionally looking up to correct the children's table manners or to order another glass of wine. It was when we were discussing the upcoming week's schedule that everything changed. "So Diana," Stephanie said, finally putting down her phone, "are you still good to take the kids on Tuesday and Thursday? My pottery class has added an extra session and it would be really convenient." "Of course," I replied. "You know I treasure my time with Lucy and William." "Great," she said, turning to James. "That means we can both attend the Hendersons' cocktail party on Thursday. Diana can just keep them for dinner." "I'd be happy to," I assured them, though I did have a doctor's appointment at 4. "I could reschedule it if you need me to." Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "No need to be dramatic. It's probably just a routine checkup anyway. Nothing urgent at your age." I felt a small sting at her words but maintained my smile. "Actually, it's a follow-up for my blood pressure, but I'm sure it can wait." "See, nothing important," Stephanie said, turning back to James. "Anyway, we should finalize our summer vacation dates. I was thinking 3 weeks in Europe this year." 3 weeks, I couldn't help asking. Who would look after the children while you're gone for so long? And that's when it happened. The moment that would change everything. Stephanie let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "You would, obviously. That's why we have you right. You're just the babysitter after all." The table fell silent. Even the children sensed the sudden tension, their little eyes darting between the adults. I felt as if I'd been slapped, the words echoing in my head. Just the babysitter, not a grandmother, not a mother-in-law, not even a person worthy of basic respect, just the babysitter. I looked at James, waiting for him to say something to defend me, to express even the slightest disapproval at his wife's words. But he simply stared at his plate, his jaw clenching, but his lips sealed shut. Stephanie, perhaps realizing she had crossed a line, gave a small artificial laugh. "I just meant you're so good with the kids and they love spending time with you. It's a win-win." But the damage was done. In that moment, with perfect clarity, I saw the truth of how they viewed me, not as a beloved family member who had sacrificed and contributed enormously to their comfortable lifestyle, but as a convenient, unpaid service provider who could be taken for granted and dismissed at will. Something shifted inside me then, a quiet but profound change. On the outside, I maintained my composure, even managing a small smile as the waiter brought out a birthday cake with a single candle. I made the appropriate noises of delight as everyone sang "Happy Birthday," though. James couldn't quite meet my eyes. I thanked them for the lovely evening as we parted in the parking lot, accepting the mechanical hugs from Stephanie and the warmer embraces from my grandchildren. But inside, as I drove home alone to my empty house, a decision was forming. A lifetime of giving without receiving even basic respect in return had reached its natural conclusion, and as I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly what needed to be done. The house felt especially empty that night. I moved through the familiar rooms, turning on lights but finding no comfort in the warm glow. In our bedroom, the bed still made up on Thomas's side. Even after all these years, I finally allowed the tears to come. They weren't just tears of hurt, but of anger and disappointment, emotions I had suppressed for far too long in the name of family peace. "What would you do, Thomas?" I whispered to the empty room. I could almost hear his response, firm and clear. He had always been the backbone when I was too willing to bend. "Enough is enough, Diana," he would say. "Respect is not optional in this family." After changing into my nightgown, I went to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Inside was a folder containing the trust fund documents Thomas and I had established for Lucy and William. I hadn't looked at them since his death, trusting our lawyer to handle the annual financial details while I maintained my role as trustee. Now I read through them carefully, paying special attention to the clauses we had insisted on including. Thomas had been particularly adamant about this part, the trustee. Now me alone would have complete discretion to modify, withhold, or even terminate the trust if it was determined that access to the funds would not serve the beneficiary's best interests. We had included this unusual provision specifically to prevent the money from fostering entitlement or damaging character development. There was also a clause allowing for conditions to be placed on fund access requiring beneficiaries or their guardians to demonstrate certain values or behaviors. At the time, we had imagined using this to encourage the children's education or charitable inclinations. We never anticipated it would be needed to address their parents' behavior. I thought back to the day we had signed these documents. Thomas had squeezed my hand and said, "Money is a tool, Diana, not a right. Our grandchildren should understand that before they have access to it." How right he had been. At midnight, unable to sleep, I called my dear friend Eleanor, who had been my rock since Thomas's passing. A retired family therapist, she had observed the situation with James and Stephanie with growing concern over the years. "They called you what?" she exclaimed when I recounted the evening's events. "Oh, Diana, that's beyond disrespectful. That's deliberately cruel." "Am I overreacting?" I asked, still second-guessing myself as I had for years. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. "Stop making excuses for them," Eleanor said firmly. "You've been doing that for years, and where has it gotten you? If anything, you've been underreacting. There's a difference between being kind and being a doormat, and they've been treating you like the latter for far too long." We talked for over an hour discussing options and potential consequences. Eleanor reminded me that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to allow adult children to experience the natural outcomes of their choices and behavior. But what about Lucy and William? I asked, my primary concern always the grandchildren I adored. I don't want to punish them for their parents' actions. "Think long-term," Eleanor advised. "What kind of adults will they become if they grow up watching their mother treat you this way without consequences? What are they learning about respect, gratitude, and family relationships?" It was a perspective I hadn't fully considered before, and it resonated deeply. By allowing this treatment to continue, I wasn't just harming myself but potentially my grandchildren as well. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the night pacing, weighing my options, considering every angle. I knew that whatever action I took would have lasting repercussions for our family dynamics. There would be anger, possibly even a temporary estrangement. Was I prepared for that possibility? Could I bear not seeing Lucy and William regularly? But then I remembered Stephanie's dismissive words, James's silent complicity, years of increasing disrespect and entitlement. I thought of the family business Thomas and I had built from nothing, the values of hard work and integrity we had tried to instill in our son, values that seemed to be eroding under Stephanie's influence. By morning, exhausted but resolute, I had made my decision. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I called my lawyer, Andrew Phillips, who had handled our family's legal matters for decades. "Diana," he answered warmly, "this is an early call. Is everything all right?" "I need to make some changes to the grandchildren's trust," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "How soon can we meet?" "I can see you at 9 this morning," he replied, obviously hearing the urgency in my tone. "May I ask what kind of changes you're considering?" "I want to implement the conditional access clause," I explained. "And I need to make it clear to James and Stephanie that continued financial support, both through the trust and from me personally, will depend on demonstrated respect and changed behavior." There was a pause before Andrew responded. "I see. This is a significant step, Diana. Are you certain this is what you want to do?" "More certain than I've been about anything since Thomas died," I answered firmly. "It's time to re-establish some boundaries in this family." After hanging up, I took a long shower, letting the warm water wash away the tears and tension of the night. As I dressed in a business suit I hadn't worn in years, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Behind the new wrinkles and silver hair, I saw a glimpse of the confident woman who had helped build a business empire from scratch. That woman wouldn't allow herself to be called just the babysitter by anyone, let alone someone who had benefited so greatly from her generosity. With a deep breath, I picked up my purse and car keys. It was time to reclaim not just my dignity but the future of our family. As painful as this confrontation would be, I knew in my heart it was necessary. Sometimes, love means setting firm boundaries, especially when they're difficult to enforce. My meeting with Andrew lasted just over an hour. He was thorough and meticulous as always, explaining the legal ramifications of the changes I wanted to make. We drafted an official letter outlining the new conditions of the trust. Mandatory family therapy, demonstrated respect toward all family members, and a probationary period during which James and Stephanie would need to support themselves, without financial assistance from me. This is within your rights, as trustee, Andrew assured me, but be prepared for significant pushback. When money is involved, people can react unpredictably. I understand, I replied, signing the documents with a steady hand. But this isn't about the money. It's about the values that money represents. Andrew promised to send official notification to James and Stephanie that afternoon. I returned home, bracing myself for the storm that would surely follow. I didn't have to wait long. At precisely 2:15 that afternoon, my phone rang. It was James, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, what is this letter we just got from Andrew Phillips? There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, James," I said calmly. "I've decided to implement some changes regarding the Children's Trust Fund and my financial support going forward." "But why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Everything was fine." "Was it?" I asked quietly. "Was it really fine when your wife referred to me as just the babysitter at my birthday dinner? When you sat there and said nothing to defend me, was it fine when I've been treated as nothing more than a convenient ATM and childcare service for years?" There was a long silence before James spoke again, his tone now cautious. "Mom, I know Stephanie can be insensitive sometimes, but she didn't mean anything by it. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "I don't think I am," I replied. "This has been building for a long time, James. Last night was simply the final straw. I think we need to have a serious conversation, all of us together. Can you and Stephanie come to my house tonight at 7? After some hesitation, James agreed. I spent the next few hours preparing myself mentally and emotionally for what would undoubtedly be a difficult confrontation. I made tea, arranged cookies on a plate, simple actions that helped calm my nerves. This wasn't about revenge. It was about resetting boundaries that should never have been crossed. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. James entered first, looking uncomfortable and slightly ashamed. Stephanie followed, her expression a mixture of anger and calculation, already strategizing how to handle the situation. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room where I had arranged 3 chairs to face each other. "No hiding behind the children tonight, no distractions." "I'll get right to the point," I began once they were seated. "For years now, I've allowed myself to be disrespected, taken for granted, and treated as nothing more than a financial resource and free childcare provider. Last night made it abundantly clear how you both see me, and I've decided that changes need to be made." "This is ridiculous," Stephanie interrupted, her voice sharp. "So I made one thoughtless comment, and now you're threatening to cut off the children. What kind of grandmother does that?" "I'm not cutting off Lucy and William," I clarified. "The trust still exists. I'm simply implementing conditions that need to be met before those funds become accessible. And I'm also reevaluating my personal financial support to you both." "Conditions?" James asked, looking bewildered. "What kind of conditions?" I handed them each a copy of the document Andrew had prepared. "Family therapy, for starters. Demonstrated respect toward all family members, including me. And a period during which you'll need to support yourselves, without additional financial help from me." Stephanie's face flushed with anger. "This is emotional blackmail. You can't do this." "Actually, I can," I said calmly. "Thomas and I included these provisions specifically to ensure the trust would foster positive values, not entitlement. As sole trustee, I have full legal authority to implement them." "So you're punishing us because your feelings got hurt," Stephanie scoffed. "That's childish and petty." "No, I'm establishing boundaries that should have been in place long ago," I corrected her. "And I'm doing it not just for myself, but for Lucy and William, too. What kind of example are we setting for them when they see their mother treat their grandmother with such disrespect? What are they learning about gratitude, about family relationships, about how to treat people who care for them? We can fight this legally, Stephanie threatened, turning to James. Tell her we'll get our own lawyer. James, who had been surprisingly quiet, finally spoke up. Stephanie, stop. His voice was firm in a way I hadn't heard in years. My mother is right. Stephanie stared at him in shock. What? She's right, James repeated, looking at me with new eyes. We have been taking advantage of her generosity. I've allowed it to happen because it was easier than confronting the truth. He turned to his wife. The way you spoke to my mother last night was inexcusable, and it wasn't an isolated incident. I should have said something then, and every time before that. I'm sorry I didn't. Stephanie's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. You can't be serious. You're taking her side. There shouldn't be sides in a family, I interjected gently. That's part of the problem. We should be supporting each other, respecting each other, even when we disagree. This isn't fair, Stephanie said, tears now forming in her eyes. Whether they were genuine or calculated was hard to tell. We've built our life around certain financial expectations. The children's schools, our home, everything. How are we supposed to maintain that without your help? The same way most people do, I answered. By living within your means, making responsible choices, perhaps even downsizing, if necessary. James makes a good salary at his firm. Many families live comfortably on much less. And what about the children? Stephanie demanded. They'll be the ones suffering when we have to pull them out of their schools, cancel their activities. That's a choice you and James will have to make, I said. But consider this what's more valuable to Lucy and William in the long run. Expensive schools and activities, or learning the values of respect, gratitude, and responsibility. Thomas and I built our company from nothing while raising James. It wasn't always easy, but it taught him important lessons. At least I thought it did. James winced at this, but nodded slowly. Mom's right, Stephanie. We've become too dependent, too entitled. Maybe this is the wake-up call we needed. Stephanie stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. I can't believe you're both being so unreasonable. Come on, James. We're leaving. To my surprise and relief, James didn't immediately follow. I think we should consider what Mom is saying, Stephanie. Maybe the therapy is a good idea. For all of us. Fine, Stephanie snapped. You stay and keep taking her guilt trip. I'm going home to our children. She stormed out the front door, slamming behind her. James and I sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again, his voice heavy with regret. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. I don't know how we got here, how I let things get so out of hand. It happened gradually, I said, reaching out to take his hand. But we can fix this, James. Not overnight, but over time, with effort from everyone. She's not going to make this easy, he warned, obviously referring to Stephanie. I know, I acknowledged. But sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. Your father taught us both that. James stayed for another hour. We talked more openly than we had in years about his father, about the values we once shared, about his own struggles in his marriage. When he finally left to go home and face Stephanie, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps this painful confrontation could be the beginning of healing, not just the end of enabling. As I locked the door behind him, I whispered to the empty house, I did it, Thomas. I finally stood up for myself. And somehow I felt certain he would have approved. The next 2 weeks passed in tense silence. My normally busy phone remained quiet, no calls from James or Stephanie, no FaceTime sessions with Lucy and William. I had anticipated this reaction, but hadn't fully prepared for how deeply the silence would hurt. Each day I found myself wandering into the guest bedroom I had decorated, especially for when my grandchildren visited, touching the stuffed animals and books we had enjoyed together, wondering when or if I would see them again. I called Eleanor frequently during this period, seeking reassurance that I had done the right thing. It's the silent treatment, she explained. A classic manipulation tactic. They're hoping you'll break down, call them in tears, and retract everything just to end the separation from your grandchildren. It's working, I admitted, my voice breaking. I miss them so much. Stay strong, Eleanor urged. This is a crucial moment. If you give in now, nothing will ever change. They need to understand you're serious. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into garden work, joining additional activities at the senior center, even volunteering at the local library's children's reading hour, though being around other people's grandchildren only, sharpened the ache of missing my own. Each night I looked at photos of Lucy and William, wondering what they had been told about why they weren't seeing their grandmother. On the 17th day of silence, there was an unexpected knock at my door. When I opened it, I found James standing alone on my porch, looking tired and subdued. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside, my heart racing with both hope and apprehension. We sat in the kitchen where I poured us both coffee, an ordinary ritual that felt strangely formal under the circumstances. "How are the children?" I asked immediately, unable to contain my most pressing concern. "They're okay," he assured me. "They miss you. Lucy keeps asking when they can come visit. I've told them you're not feeling well, which isn't entirely a lie, I guess." He looked down at his cup. "None of us has been feeling well lately." "And Stephanie?" I asked cautiously. James sighed heavily. "That's partly why I'm here. Things have been difficult at home." Stephanie was furious after our meeting. She wanted to hire a lawyer, immediately contest the trust changes, even sue you for emotional distress. He gave a rueful smile. "Turns out lawyers cost money we apparently don't have enough of anymore." "I'm sorry it's been hard," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I never wanted my son to suffer. "Don't apologize," James said firmly. "You were right, Mom. About everything. These past 2 weeks have been eye-opening. Without the option of asking you for money, we've had to take a hard look at our finances. The amount of debt Stephanie has accumulated is—" He shook his head, staggering. "Credit cards, maxed out loans I didn't even know about. We've been living far beyond our means, even with your help." I listened, offering no judgment, as James continued to share the revelations of the past 2 weeks. How he had discovered shopping bags hidden in the back of closets, purchases Stephanie had concealed from him. How they had argued for the first time about financial priorities and responsibilities. How he had begun to see patterns in their relationship that echoed what I had experienced with Stephanie. "I'm not saying it's all her fault," James clarified. "I enabled it. I chose the path of least resistance, both with our finances and with how she treated you. I failed both of you in different ways." "What happens now?" I asked gently. "We need help," James admitted. "Real help. I've scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor to figure out how to manage our debt. And—" he hesitated. "I've also found a family therapist like you suggested. I've told Stephanie it's non-negotiable if she wants to work through this together." "And how did she respond to that?" "Not well initially," James acknowledged. "There was a lot of blame, a lot of anger directed at you. But I think reality is starting to sink in. We can't maintain our lifestyle without making significant changes, and that's becoming clearer every day." "Would it help if I spoke with her?" I offered, though the thought made my stomach clench with anxiety. James considered this. "Maybe, but not yet. Give her a little more time to adjust to the new reality. What might help, though, is if the children could see you. They really do miss you, and they shouldn't be caught in the middle of adult problems." We arranged for me to visit that weekend while Stephanie was at her friend's baby shower. It would be just James, the children, and me. A small step toward rebuilding what had been broken. That Saturday, when Lucy ran into my arms, her small body warm and trusting against mine, I knew in my heart that no matter how difficult this process might be, it was worth it. William was a bit more reserved at first, clearly confused by the sudden absence and reappearance of his grandmother. But he soon warmed up when I produced the new dinosaur book I had bought for him. The visit was bittersweet. Joyful in the moments of connection with my grandchildren, but tinged with sadness at the underlying tension. James was trying his best to make everything seem normal, but the children were perceptive enough to sense that something had changed. As promised, James had scheduled our first family therapy session for the following week. Stephanie had reluctantly agreed to attend, though James confided she was doing so primarily to prove to the therapist how unreasonable you're being. I didn't mind her motivation as long as she participated. The first session was as awkward and uncomfortable as I had anticipated. "Doctor," Melinda Carter, a calm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, began by establishing ground rules for our discussions. No interrupting, no personal attacks, focusing on I statements rather than accusations. Stephanie spent most of the session with arms crossed, defensively speaking, only when directly addressed, her responses clipped and minimal. James made a genuine effort to engage, though he often seemed caught between his wife and mother, trying to navigate the conflicting currents of loyalty and truth. I tried to remain open and honest without becoming emotional, though at times it was difficult to revisit the years of accumulated hurts. This is just the beginning, Dr. Carter reminded us at the end of that first difficult hour. Healing family relationships takes time and commitment from everyone involved. The fact that you're all here is already a positive step. Over the next several weeks, a new pattern emerged. Weekly therapy sessions that gradually became less strained, though progress was neither linear nor consistent. Supervised visits with Lucy and William, sometimes with James present occasionally, with Stephanie participating stiffly. Financial discussions about transitioning to a more sustainable lifestyle, including the painful decision to sell the vacation property they had recently purchased and move to a smaller, more affordable home. The most significant breakthrough came nearly 2 months into our therapy journey. We were discussing a recent incident where Stephanie had made a dismissive comment about my outfit at Lucy's school recital, falling back into old patterns of subtle disrespect. "I'm curious, Stephanie," Dr. Carter said, "what feelings come up for you when Diana is receiving positive attention from James or the children?" Stephanie was silent for a long moment before answering, her voice uncharacteristically small. "Jealousy, I guess. And fear." "Fear of what?" Dr. Carter prompted gently. "Fear of not being enough," Stephanie admitted, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. "Diana built this successful business, raised this perfect son, has all this money and security. I'm just, I don't know, a disappointment in comparison. It's easier to push her away than to feel like I'm constantly falling short." It was a moment of vulnerability I had never witnessed from my daughter-in-law, a glimpse behind the confident, sometimes arrogant facade she typically presented. In that moment, I saw not the entitled woman who had called me just the babysitter, but a insecure person struggling with her own deep-seated fears of inadequacy. "I never meant to make you feel that way," I told her sincerely. "And I never compared you to me or found you wanting. All I ever wanted was to be treated with basic respect and included as a valued member of this family." "I know," Stephanie said quietly. "I think I always knew that, which made it worse somehow. It was easier to make you the villain than to admit I was acting out of my own insecurities. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were still difficult days, setbacks where old patterns re-emerged, moments of tension and misunderstanding. But something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first, genuine change began to take root. By the time the Christmas holidays approached, we had established a new way of relating to each other. Not perfect, not without occasional strain, but markedly different from the toxic patterns of the past. James had found his voice again, able to stand firm in his values while balancing the needs of both his wife and mother. Stephanie, though still struggling at times with her competitive feelings toward me, had begun to express gratitude more freely and to check her more entitled impulses. And I had learned valuable lessons, too, about the difference between generosity and enabling, about setting boundaries without ultimatums, about the complex dynamics that can drive seemingly inexplicable behavior. We were all growing in our own ways, and at our own pace. The Christmas gathering at my home that year was modest compared to previous holidays. The gifts were fewer and more thoughtful, the meals simpler but prepared with love by all of us together in my kitchen. As we sat around the table, I looked at the faces of my family, the tension of the past year giving way to a tentative new harmony, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the difficult journey we had undertaken together. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but perhaps it was the one we needed to find our way back to what truly mattered. 1 year after that fateful birthday dinner, we gathered again at La Maison to celebrate my 68th birthday. This time, there was no tension underlying the celebration. No barbed comments or silent resentments. Stephanie arrived on time, bringing a handmade gift the children had helped create, a scrapbook filled with family photos and heartfelt messages. James seemed more relaxed, more present, no longer constantly mediating between his wife and mother. Lucy, now 8, and William, 6, were thriving despite the significant changes in their family's lifestyle. They had adjusted well to their new, smaller home and public schools, perhaps even benefiting from the more grounded approach to material possessions their parents were now modeling. Most importantly, they were growing up in an environment of genuine respect and appreciation, where gratitude was expressed freely and the value of relationships was prioritized over status or possessions. The trust fund remained intact, with new, clearer guidelines for its purpose and use. Rather than an assumed entitlement, it was now understood as a resource for education, entrepreneurship, and growth, with conditions that emphasized character development alongside financial support. James and Stephanie had worked diligently to establish financial independence, living within their means and gradually paying down the substantial debt they had accumulated during years of excessive spending. Our weekly therapy sessions had transitioned to monthly check-ins, more preventative maintenance than crisis intervention now. Dr. Carter had helped us develop better communication tools, ways to express needs and concerns before they festered into resentment. We had learned to recognize triggers and patterns that could lead us back into unhealthy dynamics. Perhaps the most surprising development was my evolving relationship with Stephanie. What began as grudging participation in mandatory therapy had gradually transformed into something I never expected: a genuine, if sometimes still tentative, friendship. Behind the competitive facade, I discovered a creative, intelligent woman with her own insecurities and strengths. As she became more secure in herself, the need to diminish others, including me, had diminished as well. "I never thought we'd get here," Stephanie admitted one afternoon, as we worked together in my garden, something that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "There were days I was certain we'd end up in some bitter, permanent estrangement." "So was I confessed. There were moments I questioned whether standing up for myself was worth the potential cost." "I'm glad you did," she said, surprising me. As painful as it was at the time, it forced us to confront things we had been avoiding for years. James and I are in a better place now, not just financially, but in every way. He respects himself more, and honestly, that makes me respect him more too. It hadn't been an easy journey. There had been weeks of anger, tears, and painful revelations. James had confronted his own passive role in enabling both his wife's behavior and his mother's overgiving. Stephanie had faced difficult truths about her spending habits and the insecurities that drove her need for status and control. I had examined my own patterns of conflict avoidance and the ways I had sometimes used financial generosity as a substitute for more difficult emotional work. "You know what I've realized?" I said to Eleanor over lunch nearly 15 months after I had made that decisive call to my lawyer. "This was never really about money at all." "Of course not," she agreed. "Money was just the playing field where deeper issues were being worked out. Respect, boundaries, self-worth, fear control. None of that was actually about dollars and cents." "I wonder if we could have resolved those issues without the financial leverage," I mused. "If I hadn't had the trust fund as a catalyst for change." Eleanor considered this. Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes people need a significant wake-up call to recognize patterns they've normalized. The trust fund wasn't just money, Diana. It represented consequences for behavior that had been consequence-free for too long. She was right, of course. The trust fund had been the catalyst, but the real work had happened in those difficult conversations, in the painful self-examination, in the daily practice of new, healthier patterns of interaction. The money had gotten everyone's attention, but the healing had come through the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust and respect day by day. As my relationship with James, Stephanie, and my grandchildren continued to evolve and strengthen, I often reflected on the lessons of this challenging chapter in our family story. That true generosity comes with appropriate boundaries, not endless giving that enables dysfunctional behavior. That respect cannot be purchased, and attempting to do so ultimately diminishes everyone involved. That standing up for oneself, while initially painful and frightening, is sometimes the most loving action possible, not just for oneself, but for others who need the opportunity to grow. that healing family relationships requires honesty, vulnerability, and willingness to examine uncomfortable truths from all sides. That it's never too late to change destructive patterns, even those that have persisted for years. And perhaps most importantly, that love sometimes means having the courage to risk temporary pain for the possibility of deeper, more authentic connection. When people ask me now about the secret to our family's transformation, I often think of that moment when I sat alone in my house, gathering the strength to make that difficult call to take a stand after years of accommodation and compromise. It would have been easier in the short term to continue as before, to accept the disrespect and take comfort in whatever limited role I was permitted in my grandchildren's lives. But that would have been a disservice not just to myself but to James, to Stephanie, and especially to Lucy and William, who deserved to grow up in a family where respect and gratitude were foundational values, not optional niceties. So if you're watching this and struggling with similar family dynamics, wondering if it's worth the risk to stand up for yourself, to demand the respect you deserve, I hope our story gives you courage. The path won't be easy, and there are no guarantees. But in my experience, true family healing begins when we love ourselves and others enough to insist on better, even when that insistence comes at a cost. What about you? Have you ever had to take a difficult stand with family members who were taking you for granted? How did you handle it, and what was the outcome? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, it's never too late to change the dynamics in your relationships, to replace entitlement with gratitude and disrespect with mutual appreciation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you wisdom and courage in your own family journey.